Well, for more on what's happening with these talks, we can bring in Rouzbeh Parsi, the head of the Middle East and North Africa program at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Thanks so much for joining our program today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to begin with what the U.S. has been saying or not saying. They've been sending sort of mixed messages about what they're looking to achieve out of these talks. But, as we were discussing, that the fact that talks are happening at all is pretty significant. So I guess, what is Iran hoping to achieve and what's the U.S. looking to get out of it?
We can say that the first round that took place in Oman was with very low expectations of it going anywhere. So everyone was positively surprised that it went as well as it did. Now, for the second round and any consecutive rounds, the criteria for success, so to speak, is going to be higher. The bar is going to be higher. So if the first time was just to see that the other party was serious, now they're going to have to slowly get into the details of what it is that they're demanding of each other and find a way of adjusting their demands to what the other party is willing to give. That requires a kind of a bureaucratic process. That is, you need your experts to deal with the technical stuff. And so one of the big question marks on the American side is whether Witkoff and Trump are leveraging and using the actual expertise that exists and can make sure that there is a bureaucratic process that secures whatever it is they're agreeing on for each round so that it can become reality. So that's one of the question marks on the US side. The other one, of course, is how long is Trump going to care? Because as we've seen from Ukraine, his attention span isn't necessarily very long. And this is not something they're going to solve over 1 or 2 weekends here and there. So the question is, to what extent is there resilience and stamina for this? On the Iranian side, of course, they're not interested into an open-ended negotiation where everything that they do or don't do in the region is going to be on the table. So they prefer this to be, in a sense, a way back to the old deal, which Trump destroyed. But of course, now it's going to have to be called something else, and it has to be somehow better. Now, what better means is very different in Tehran and Washington.
Now, it's interesting you bring up the negotiating style. Donald Trump, business background, sort of carrots and sticks happening here. He just recently said that he wants to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon, but that he also wants Iran to be, quote, great and prosperous and terrific. So, trying to figure out exactly what that means. Is that, is there a possibility of some sanctions being lifted in exchange for nuclear site inspections? Sort of what was in the previous deal that he threw out? And I mean, are there other possible scenarios to follow up on?
Yes, I mean, you could say that the minimum, of course, is to go back to what the old deal had, which was a cap of Iranian uranium enrichment to 3.67%, and a cap on how much low enriched uranium was allowed to be in the country at any point in time, and inspections by the IAEA. So I think that is the bare minimum that the Trump administration is going to have to go for. And I think the Iranians aren't necessarily, impossible on those things, because that is what they agreed to last time. The problem here is, will Donald Trump stick to that? So that's number one. Number two is Bibi Netanyahu and the hawks within his own White House, because this is a very divided house, want more. And that's how we saw the very different statements from Witkoff. On the one hand, going back to the old deal, perhaps with some enhancements. And then the next moment, he's basically saying that Iran has to dismantle the whole program as such, which is a red line in Tehran. They have never agreed to anything like that in the previous 20 years, and I don't really see why they would do so now. So in that sense, yes, you could go all the way and be optimistic and say that there can be sanctions relief if Iran gives up much more. And that is more than Obama could achieve because Congress was against him. On the other hand, you might end up with something that looks very similar to the old deal. And the question is whether that will survive the enmity of Netanyahu and everyone else who's going to come in and tell Donald Trump that it's not good enough.
Now, also, as you mentioned when you referred to the situation with negotiations in Ukraine, President Trump also doesn't have a lot of patience. So if things aren't going the direction he wants them to, he's tended to threaten, in this case, military action if there isn't a deal reached in a timeline he likes. How likely is that outcome, or is that just sort of more bluster on the president's part?
I think he himself is absolutely not interested in a war. I mean, part of his political career has been built on taking the US out of wars, endless wars, especially in the Middle East. But of course, here we have to remember that there are hawks in his administration, and then there is Bibi Netanyahu, and we've already seen through leaks to the New York Times and others that the Israelis do have plans for attacking nuclear sites in Iran. And the Israelis know very well that they cannot finish off the Iranian nuclear program. They will require American help. So either they will get the Americans to go along, or they will, in a sense, trigger the Americans to enter by getting an Iranian retaliation, which then makes it politically impossible in Washington to stay out of it. So that's one way in which we could still end up in a war. So it is not a theoretical danger. But I think the other timeline here is, of course, the snapback, which is something that only the Europeans now can trigger, which would mean that all the UN sanctions will return on Iran. And that is more time sensitive in it that has to be done by June. So we will see in the next month how much these negotiations make progress. And if they do, then those things will not be on the table.
Rouzbeh, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us on France 24. That's Rouzbeh Parsi, the head of the Middle East and North Africa program at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs.